Good afternoon, everybody. I like the Adapt Centre's tagline, engaging content, engaging people. And it's nicely ambiguous as to exactly what it means. But that idea of engagement and how you bring content, information to people in a way that is meaningful and valuable to them, well, that's a very complex challenge, and we've seen some elements of that complexity already today. Because we live in a world that is complex. We have a huge volume, veracity, velocity of content bombarding us all the time. How do we understand that content? How do we make sense of it so that we can understand it? That's a challenge, because already we're starting to think about, well, there might be processes and things to help us to do that. So for example, pick a random person in the room here and ask them to filter all the content you're going to read for the next year. Would you trust them to do that? Yet at the moment we're already trusting algorithms to do that on our behalf. The problem with that example then is, well, how well do they know you? They're random, so the chance of them actually knowing you is relatively low. So our own individual complexity means that, one, they might think you, because of your certain stereotype, they might think you should get information in a certain way, in a certain form. But the truth is, you're rapidly changing. Your interests change. Some you'll retain for a long time, some will peak, some will kind of trough, but it will change over time. So complexity is the challenge. And my job today is to talk about some of the technical elements that we have in the Adapt Centre, a large research organisation with over 200 people that are dealing with some of those components. But as you've heard, we're not doing it solely from a technical perspective. We're doing it with ethicists. We're doing it with philosophers. We're doing it with people who are thinking about the societal change. Because our technology is socio-technical. It is impacting how society functions and the kind of things that we do in those societies. The research program of Adapt is broken down into 5 areas. How we understand content, how we can tweeze it apart, make sense of it, so that not just the small utterance, but how it is viewed in context, what data you can uplift from it, and understand it better. Then how you can transform it. Because one of the challenges we have is with that volume of content, well, could you summarize it for me in a way that I might understand, but can I trust that summary? So that's part of the challenge there. The area that I lead is around personalization. By understanding the person, the individual, what can we do with that material to channel it to that person in a way that helps them understand? But don't disenfranchise the person from that process. It's very easy for me to create a stereotypical model of a person and assume it's right. That assumption is where it's flawed. How do you ensure the person is part of the modeling process? So one, they might gain insights and reflections on themselves, but more than that, they can control this personalization process. And the means and modalities through which we're interacting with content is changing all the time. The idea of talking to our phones still seems just a little bit silly. Siri and OK Google, they're getting there, but they're very transactional. But that's changing very, very rapidly. And that's just one modality. The way in which we're interacting with these technologies are changing. And the roles they have, go to any train station in Ireland and what do you see? Everyone looking down at their phones. Well, can we use these devices to encourage interactions amongst people? Oh, by the way, your friend is at the end of the platform. The person standing beside you, loves to chat, and you love to chat, and you know what? You like to chat about the same things. That seems a little bit societally weird, but how far are we away from technologies that will foster these types of things? But one of the challenges, and the area in the middle there, is how do you manage these suites of technologies in ways that are appropriate, so that we know what happens to our personal data, so we can understand what's happened when content gets sliced and churned around. Because the nature of content is changing, and we know this. You look at that picture, and when do you think, when do you set this picture? Is this 1950s? Is this 1980s? But this is not a picture of today. Yet that book has certain affordances that we must not forget, and values that the digital content that we currently consume has lost, or at least it's been obscured. Flip to the front page of that book. What it'll tell you? The title, the author. The first page will tell you the edition, where it was published, when it was published. Gives you a sense, possibly, of authority, whether that's correct or not. You understand it. Can you see if this book has been modified? Sure. As you leaf through it, you can see if pages have been torn out, if items have been struck through, if somebody has maybe noted a certain page that was of value to them. So the book, its physical kind of state, carried additional metadata, additional value, and also the sense that it hadn't been altered. Okay, go to the web now. Open up an Irish Times article. How many editions have there been of that article? How many times have they improved things? And were they only subtle typos that they didn't feel that they need to tell us about, or was there a substantive change that they did report? well, that's a journalistic organization. They have a set of ethical codes that they use to manipulate their content and how they communicate that with us. But not every organization operates in such an ethical way. So how content is sliced, diced, and recomposed can lead us to believe it might be authoritative, but it's not. And that's one of the challenges that we've lost from this form of content. But we can do more with the technologies than we used to be able to. So in this example, these are images from Flickr. And the challenge here was to give people a way of aesthetically browsing images. We wanted to get more from the photographs. So how could we do this? Well, on one hand, you can rely on the tags that was used to describe it. But people tend to be fairly functional with their tags. This is a beach, this is a girl, this is a car. They're useful to help identify what the item within the image is, but they tell you very little about the aesthetics. So we applied algorithms, and I'm going to come back to algorithms. They're our great friend and our great enemy. But we applied an algorithm that would consistently uplift those into a set of terminology. So these images are lively, luminous, and cool. I don't know if you agree with that, but the algorithm is absolutely consistent in this example. If you look for lively, luminous, cool images, then you click on a beach, aesthetically they'll all have a very similar aesthetic. The nice thing about that is it's moved to something that's a little bit closer to what human beings understand in content. And that's what we're trying to do when you look at a piece of content, is make it more useful, discoverable, recomposable, so that when it comes to that volume of information that's hitting us at such a speed, the machine processes can make sense of it to help determine, is it of value, is it of worth to the individual. Here's an example, if I can play the video, of a tool that we developed in the Adapt Center called Lean Back Learning. And here I've done a search for World War II. I'll talk about the languages in a moment, but it's going off to Wikipedia, so again we have issues around authority here. And what it's going to generate is it's going to generate an on-the-fly podcast based on an article in Wikipedia. But it's doing a lot of smart things. We'll think about the algorithm in a moment. But what it's doing is it's going to give a podcast between 6 and 24 minutes. It's very hard to know exactly until it processes it through. But it's looking at 3, at least, articles on World War II. The article in French, English, and German. It's going to output it in English, that's what I requested. It's going to translate all of those articles into English, figure out which are the most important sentences across all of those articles in the different topic areas. It's going to recompose those and summarize them based on length. It's then going to take that text and turn it into a spoken voice and play it back to me. That's a lot of transforming of content that an algorithm is doing. It's not on a personalized basis. It didn't know anything about me as a user, so it doesn't know what my experience, expertise, and knowledge of World War II happens to be. And it has broken it down into these different areas, the aftermath, the background, the causes, and so on. So that's an example of how you can go from a piece of content to a manipulated piece of content. And the real challenges that we start to face is, well, am I going to accept this podcast as authoritative? Do I know enough about the source? Do I know enough about the algorithm? And can I dig deeper? How much material am I missing here? You've given me 7 minutes of Wikipedia material. What does that mean? How deep was that source if I was to dig through it myself? What other sources should I be looking at if I want to go deeper, broader, or whatever? And that's some of the challenge that we have to face. Because increasingly our lives are being ruled, or at the very least guided, by algorithms. So let's take a hypothetical example. I'm going to create a piece of software. And what it's going to do is it's going to observe everything that you type into Facebook or Twitter. And it's going to examine your average use of vocabulary relative to other native English speakers, let's say, or other English speakers. And my algorithm is going to look at you, and it's going to determine that you are below average. Right. Very simple technology to write. But ethically, what have I done? I've taken things that you may not put any importance on, and I've put an importance on them. Now what am I going to do? Because I'm on Facebook, right? And I want to ensure that you stay in my portal. 2016 is the year of the portal. I want to keep you there. I want to keep your focus on my webpage. I don't want you going anywhere else. So I'm going to automatically transform all of the language to make it that little bit more simplified. If there are kind of 3 syllables and something, forget about it. Let's put it down into 1 or 2 syllable words. Make it easy for you. Okay, so 2 algorithms. One that models you incorrectly, possibly, and one that is now adjusting the content for you based on that algorithm. So there are ethical considerations there. Now let's consider the privacy consideration. I'm now going to sell this information to potential employers that you are below average in terms of your vocabulary usage. So that's somewhat of a scary use case. And that's why it's important in centres like this that we have ethicists, that we have privacy expertise involved, because all of those algorithms are easy to write. They're easy to implement, but they have very significant potential impact. Because when it comes to personalization, there are a number of different ingredients that need to be considered. The user, the individual human being, all personalization technology is based on a proxy. It's not the person, it's a model of the person. And the degree to which that person is involved in the modeling process can vary very heavily. In the example I just gave, the person was disenfranchised. We automatically determined that they had low vocabulary usage. Okay. Well, how should we engage the user in the modeling process? Is there a way for them to scrutinize, understand, and see what's going on so they're part of that process? And the other challenge is, do they want to be? How often do you look at the settings in the different computing systems that you use? It's a pain to adjust settings. It's even harder to understand it when you adjust a setting, what the implication for how that product or tool or phone or whatever it is will work on your behalf. So user modeling is one element. I've already mentioned the things that we do to content. I took very simple textual examples, but we are not in a textual world anymore. We're certainly not solely in a textual world. We are performing all of these actions and activity on multimedia content. We're taking videos. We are slicing to figure out where are the interesting scenes. We are taking text out of the video stream. We're trying to figure out, based on the animation of the speaker, the tonality of the voice, what's going on. So we're starting to tear content apart to recompose it, to transform it. Imagine you took the video of this 2-hour session and you really wanted to tune in on Dara's talk, right? But you might want a synopsis of what the previous speaker said. You take the text of the spoken word, you turn to the text, you summarize it, you read the kind of couple of paragraph summary, and then you watch a bit of his video. Because it said, that's the one that got the most laughs, it had the most audience engagement. And that's what we're doing with content. But all of this is driven by sets of algorithms. Algorithms that determine the connection between the content and the user, and often in a particular context. So let's take an example that we're actively researching in the Adapt Centre in the personalization space. We're interested in cognitive overload and cognitive dissonance. Think about it, we all have these devices sitting in our pocket or in our bag on the floor, and we know that there's part of our digitized self, our digital persona, that those devices allow us to interact with. And they're receiving notifications right now that stuff is happening around your Twitter feed, around your Facebook profile, that incoming emails are there, or that an app has updated something on your behalf. A huge flow of notifications that are really tricky to manage. Those notifications themselves are small snippets of content. So how do you understand those snippets of content and understand the context in which they should be delivered? So if my wife sends me a message right now saying, hey Owen, we need butter, that's pretty important to me. I can do nothing about it right now, but that's a message that someone needs to be interpreted based on who sent it, what the context of it is, and it needs actions. 2 actions, one to respond saying, yep, I'll handle that, and 2, that a calendar or a proximity notification will go into my phone to say, when you're near the shop, so when you get off the train, go and get butter. And those simple little things will help go from what we currently do. We are the filters of our incoming notifications, or worse, we've turned off all of those settings because the notifications are so annoying. And those controls we have are completely insufficient. They tell us, oh, I don't want to see any likes, or I want to see app mentions. But that's completely independent of what was in the message, or who sent the message. And those are the things that tend to be important to us. But as I said, we are complex. What's important to me now is not what would necessarily be important to me in half an hour or 2 hours or 4 weeks' time. So that continuous modeling and understanding allows us to hopefully control how the notifications are delivered in a more appropriate way. Because we're starting to see this as being a real challenge, that you can no longer hide yourself away. That either you're going to be disenfranchised because your friends, your colleagues, the societies, the hobbies, the things you're interested in are organising themselves on social media platforms. And if you cut yourself off from that, well, you're probably cutting yourself off from those interests. there's a good example of the journalist couple in New York who decided that because they were due a child, that they would try and do the whole thing off the grid. They wouldn't, buy any diapers online. They wouldn't register for any kind of baby shower services. They would keep it all off grid. When they go into shops, so into Target or wherever else, they buy everything on cash. After about 3 months, they were picked up by the feds because they were doing all of the things that terrorists do. So the behaviors, the expected behaviors that we have now in our lives is that we are on Facebook, that we do use these social media, that we are on email, that our mobile network picks up that we are moving between different cells. That's normal. So we can't hide away, yet we need increasing levels of control. And yet we don't want to manage that control. And this is the real challenge area that we find ourselves in. So what can happen? Well, we need other management processes that happen on our behalf. And we're starting to see, we've heard talks about it, that there is regulatory compliance, but they're 5 or 10 years behind. So they have to start operating in this soft law area. What's best practice? What is ethically appropriate? Because businesses don't want to get themselves, they don't want to be caught out, they don't want to do bad stuff necessarily, but it happens accidentally because they just say, well, just gather all that information because, I'm sure some of it's good. Well, hang on, take a step back, is that the way we should be doing it? Is that appropriate? Provenance, what happens to the bits of information? So think of your last kind of week's interaction with Facebook or Twitter. How often you engaged with it, what tweets you liked, what posts you liked, what click-throughs you did to look at articles that your friends posted. What happened to that information? How was it modeled? And has that model been used in any way to inform an algorithm? Has it been passed off to a third party? What's the provenance? Where does it go? How has it been shared? And increasingly we're seeing that these things are going to become important because we want to get more done. We want to say, I need to be in California next week. Right, get it done. So you want a service or a suite of services to orchestrate together, to look at your preferences, to get it done. None of us can afford to have personal assistants, yet we want that burden of the management of everyday life to be taken away from us, so we want digital processes to help with some of it. And that becomes a real challenge. And that's the challenge we embrace in the ethics and privacy working group. We have ethicists, people come from religious backgrounds. We have people coming from a law studies background. We have people come from technologies, from IP management backgrounds. And that's what we embrace, is that this is a complex set of socio-technical challenges that have real applied implications. So check our website. We have a whole series of different talks with which you may engage. And just leaves me to say thank you for your attention.